Thank you very much, Jen. So I will start. So thank you everybody for attending. I know we have a lot of clients. We have a lot of people who are not clients in there. So I think I'll start by just giving a background of who Braver is. So Braver, and as you can see, Jen insists on using professional models instead of actual people for all of our marketing material. So the Braver Technology is a managed service provider. We handle Eastern Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We've been in business since 1989, so quite a long time of taking care of clients. And the way that we were able to do that is that we give all of our clients a personalized service. So we basically make sure that everybody has kind of an individual touch. And we also focus on culture. So we make a point of hiring people that have a good personality that you want to talk to, you want to work with. And then on top of that, so the normal support model is to have a level one person call into the help desk. And then basically, if that person can't handle it, they escalate up and escalate up. And then finally, you get in touch with a level two, level three. We actually take that and flip it upside down. All of our engineers are at least level two and level three. So you dial in directly and talk to a high level engineer right away. And what we find is that actually gets you to the resolution quicker, typically within the one call or the one touch instead of multiple touches. But then also it just gets you back up and running quicker. And quite honestly, it gets us able to help the next client a lot quicker. And the other thing that we make sure that we have is always a live person answering the phone. So you always talk to a live person. You don't get an automated tree and hope somebody gets you back. So that's enough about us. Let's talk about our clients in our industry. So part of our offering, what we do is we offer not only our clients, but everybody in industry cybersecurity training, which is what this is. So once a quarter, we do a major cybersecurity training like this one. We also have interim steps that we do as well in between, but these ones we like to do is like an all-encompassing one. They're open for everyone to view. Our hope is that what you will do is utilize these trainings to actually, as part of your onboarding process for your team and for your staff. When you have somebody new on board, we make these readily available so that you can actually train your own team when they come on board so that they know what your security solutions are, what your security expectations are of them. So basically, we want this to be a learning experience. The other thing that this will do is help satisfy insurance requirements. So a lot of you are getting renewals for your cybersecurity insurance, and you're starting to notice that, hey, there's a lot more requirements on here than we ever had before. We actually did an entire security webinar just on insurance and how to satisfy those requirements. This training is part of that to help you satisfy those security requirements. Everything that we do, we publish right on our website. So what you can do is, as you can see on the screen, you go right to resources. Top button is cybersecurity training. And then once you get there, Tim, can you advance to the next one for me? Thank you so much. You're going to see right there, we have all of our cybersecurity training right there open to everyone to take a look at. Again, what we want you to do is be able to look at this, be able to give it to your team, say, hey, this is part of your onboarding. We have this cybersecurity training. We have one on phishing, which is extremely popular. It's about a 15-minute webinar just on how to spot a phishing email in your organization. Probably one of the most watched videos that we have, and it's great because we go through real-life examples of what to do, what you can look for, and how to prevent them. Number one way that breaches come in is through phishing. All right, so as part of Braver, what we have is a dedicated security division. So I am really excited to say that we have the head of our dedicated security division, Tim, who's coming in and doing this webinar with us. So I'm really excited. He's a nationally known speaker. Those of us in our industry know him really well. So I'm great that he's part of our team and it represents us and our clients. And I'm also happy that I get to be a little more of an attendee than a presenter this time. So this is kind of nice as well. So with that, Tim, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kenny. Appreciate the introduction. As Kenny mentioned, my name is Tim Weber. I'm the director of the security practice at ADNET Technologies. ADNET is also a new charter technologies partner. So we've had the opportunity to work with Kenny and the team directly. And a little bit, about me and my team. We provide security services for small to medium-sized businesses really all over the country at this point, and we focus in a couple key areas. Assessment services, helping organizations understand risk, and developing plans to address those risks. Security awareness training, like we do here. Security monitoring services, and then incident response. So if that worst situation happens, where you do have some type of compromise, we can come in and assist the organization. And because the scope of what we do, encompasses a lot of different aspects of security, and we work with hundreds of businesses of all shapes and sizes, it puts us what I consider kind of a unique position. And State Farm unfortunately kind of beat me to the punch, with their tagline, which is we know a lot because we've seen a lot, and that's a pretty apt descriptor for our team as well, because we get involved in so many things. We see so many different things happen to small to medium sized businesses that we want to take this and really kind of help organizations understand what the risks are, and over the course of the next 45 minutes to an hour here, give you some insight, give you some things to watch for. So from an agenda, what are we going to talk about? I always like to start by talking about what does the world look like from a 50,000 foot view when it comes to security. There's some larger trends, some larger aspects that we need to consider, and they kind of permeate through everything that we're going to talk about. But we'll then drill into a couple specific areas. In the position that we're in, we see a lot of bad things happen to people, unfortunately. And while the nature of the threats can really be all encompassing, the two biggest ones that we continue to see impacting businesses are phishing and ransomware. So we're going to spend some time talking about those two things in particular. In the second half of the presentation, after you all want to run back home and unplug all your computers, we'll give you some common sense tips. There's a lot of very simple things that you can do to kind of protect yourself. In the end, security it's a bit of a numbers game. And anything that you can do to make yourself a slightly harder target, is going to pay dividends for you. In the end, if somebody wants to get into your systems, if they have enough time, money, computing power, and talent, they're going to get in. That's just there's no system that's impenetrable. What our goal is to try and help you, crank up that security just a little bit further. And the role all of you as individuals play is absolutely enormous, because you could go out and buy every security process and technology my organization and Braver offer, but in the end, if your users don't know what to watch for, if they still fall victim to a phishing email or clicking on a ransomware link, it's all for naught. So let's get into it. So, couple big statistics in here. Unfortunately, COVID-19, the cyber threat actors took advantage of it. Businesses in turmoil, especially those first 2 to 3 months where essentially every business, from state and local government and schools to small to medium sized businesses, really everything other than healthcare, had to pivot, and had to pivot hard. Um, these threat actor groups look for opportunities, and they take advantage of it. Unfortunately, we're at a point where a good chunk of attacks are against small to medium sized businesses, and the reality is that the reason for that is that you guys are all easier targets. When you look at the security posture a large organization like a Fidelity or a GE or somebody like that has, they have dedicated security resources, dedicated budgets, and insight into that. Small to medium sized business hopefully has a security awareness, but will they actually have the wherewithal to go through it? We're at a point now where more and more organizations take security seriously, which is great, but there's still a lot of people out there that have this kind of ostrich mentality, which is I'm not important. It's not going to happen to me, and nothing could be further from the truth. The four statistics down is probably one of the biggest ones that I want to hit on, which is what people don't realize when you have a serious cybersecurity event is the amount of potential business impact that can have on your business. So when we work in particular ransomware events, it's not uncommon for it to be at least a week or 2 weeks of some or all of an organization's systems not being available. So stop and think about that for a minute. Obviously we've all, being here in New England, we've had to experience different types of weather events that make our systems inaccessible. I still remember the 2011 snowstorm where I didn't have power for 8 days. Think about that the impact of that on your business. If you don't have access to, to your technology systems for the better part of a week or 2 weeks, you can obviously function maybe for a couple hours, maybe for a day or two, but at some point it starts getting pretty serious. And as a result, almost 40% of the costs associated with a data breach are due to that lost business. I can tell you, I worked with a law firm last year that had a ransomware event. They were dead in the water for 3 days. They essentially had to shut their doors, and, it was a six-figure cost every day for that organization to not be able to function. Average of 206 days to identify a breach and 73 days to contain it. That's a real scary statistic, because what that speaks to is something that's called dwell time, which is, how long somebody is in your system before you realize it. And unfortunately, a lot of times you don't necessarily know that somebody's in your system until they've decided to make themselves known by either doing doing a ransomware attack or something like that. We've seen a gigantic increase in the average ransomware payment. So, almost 100% increase to now, it's north of $500,000. And I can tell you, our team's been involved in cases where the numbers have even been higher than that. In one case where, the initial, we didn't work it directly, but we were consulted on it, where the ransomware demand was $5 million. So, we're talking some real serious money here. So, so when we talk about the most common threats, every year when we look to refresh our content for this presentation, we take a step back and we look at what are the things that are most likely to impact businesses, impact the businesses in the space that we work. And every year it comes back to two: phishing and ransomware, phishing. They will sometimes flip themselves around as far as, the priority order as to which is more prevalent at a given time. But for the last 7 years, these have been the two things. So when we look at phishing in particular, for those of you, probably most of you know what the definition is, but the short version of what phishing is it's somebody trying to get you to do something by pretending to be somebody else. That's the short version. And there's a couple specific ones that we're going to take a look at. But let me first talk about, the term social engineering. So when an attacker, is trying to get you to do something, they're doing something that's called social engineering. And that's the fancy clinical term for really the deception and manipulation. So they're pretending to be somebody in your organization. They're pretending to be somebody that's, um, has something that they need from you, or, has a demand of you. And they're doing things like using trust and persuasion and maybe creating a sense of urgency to try and get you to fall victim to it. And what we've seen is the level of sophistication, in particular with phishing attacks, has just absolutely gone through the roof. Some of you may have recalled, and actually I got one of these, an offshoot of one of these yesterday, which was the old the Nigerian prince email scam. Where there was a Nigerian prince that had somewhere between 11 and $14 million in gold, in Nigeria, needed your help, and needed, about $3,000 to, help get the gold out of the country, and then, you'd collect, I think, half of it. Now, those attacks unfortunately were more successful than any of us would ever like to admit in this business. But the reality is that after a while they tailed off because, a couple things. One, the story just wasn't plausible. It was not a believable story. Two, if you wanted to believe that story, you would have to stop and take a look at some point and go, okay, why are they reaching out to me? You have nothing to do with Nigeria, with customs, with financial services, shipping, anything like that. It just didn't pass the reality test. And the third is that they were typically written in broken or poor English. Very frequently, they were written in some other language to start, and then, slapped into Google Translate and cut and pasted, into an email message. So, you know, those at this point are kind of the good old nostalgic days. What we see now is a level of sophistication that's really unparalleled. And one of the things I like to point out is at some point everybody's going to fall for a phishing email. I am not ashamed to admit that. I do some volunteer work in my town. I fell for a phishing email in my volunteer group's email system. I was dealing with a new vendor, waiting on a proposal from them. Clicked on something, thought it was legitimate, got sent to some weird place, and had that oh no moment of, wow, I just fell for one of these myself. And unfortunately, I had a couple levels of protection, which we'll talk about later on that we go through it. But I bring that up because everybody's going to fall victim to something at some point, and our team plays a little bit of armchair psychologist when we get involved in a case because it's okay. These things happen. These people have a business model where they're trying to get you to do things, and they continue to hone their craft. And some of the level of sophistication of these things absolutely blows me away. So just a food for thought. So one of the most common phishing types that we see is CEO fraud, or also known as business email compromise. And in a situation like that, somebody in an organization receives an email that's supposedly from the owner of the business, the CEO, the CFO, managing partner, managing director, depending on your kind of business model, and basically asks somebody in the organization, "Hey, I need you to do me a favor. You know, I need something really quick." And they will do things like, "Hey, I'm in a meeting. Can you handle this for me real quick?" Or, "I'm on vacation. Can you handle this?" Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to short circuit the rational part of your brain and have you shortcut, basically bypass any critical thinking and just getting you to start to do things. So, typically these emails will come in, they'll actually look really, really good. They will look spot on. They're written in proper English. Everything's normally good with it. Sometimes the mail addresses may show as something that doesn't look right, but in other cases, they may go out and register a fake domain name that looks very similar to what you're expecting. What ends up being the outcome of this is we've seen kind of three different variants of business email compromise. The most common one was that was the kind of along the lines of the examples we have here, where, "Hey, I need you to send money to a new vendor. I need you to pay this invoice." And it'll typically, you won't see it all in one email, but you'll see it kind of go through a string where it'll be, "Hey, are you there? I need a favor." You reply back, then you get one of these emails. And a lot of times, when we're looking at these wire transfers, they're not for insignificant amounts of money. I think the smallest one I've seen is $10,000, but I've seen 50, 100, $250,000. So, again, real dollars here. Other things that we will see are, "Hey, I need you to go out and buy a bunch of gift cards." In particular, we'll see that at the holidays. Where somebody will report to be the CEO and say, "Hey, I want to buy gift cards for all the employees. Shh, keep it a secret." So again, they're doing things to kind of throw you off the scent of trying to understand, hey, is that, trying to question it, you kind of, the short circuiting it and having you go right to that next step. If you've tried to buy a gift card in a retail store anytime in the last couple of years, I had to buy an Amazon gift card for, a coworker whose son was getting his Eagle Scout award. And I was shocked that not only did the person that was checking me out ask me a question as to what the gift card was for, but there was a little bit of a waiver that I actually had to sign off on on the payment pad. And the reason for that is gift cards have become a form of currency in all sorts of different types of scams. We're about two steps away from the gift cards being locked up with a Sudafed behind the pharmacy desk. The other thing that we will see is we will see we've seen it once or twice where somebody in a payroll role will get an email that says, "Hey, I just switched banks. Can you change my direct deposit information?" Obviously that's a one and done attack, because you would think that if somebody didn't get their paycheck, they would notice it after one. But again, these folks are looking for some type of quick hit. The other type of thing that we'll see is Office 365 phishing. So Office 365 is an absolutely wonderful platform. Tens of millions of people that are on this platform, really transformative for businesses, especially in a pandemic world or post-pandemic world where we're working as a distributed workforce. The problem with that is its success also makes it a gigantic target. So, we will see emails that come out similar to this. They're actually a little bit better now, where it'll say, "Hey, you need to do something or your account's going to be deactivated within 24 hours." Some of the newer offshoots will say, "Your account's going to be deactivated and your data is going to get deleted." So those are things, again, where they're trying to get you to do something by creating that sense of urgency. We highlight a couple things here on, dear user, generic greeting, an O, a zero instead of an O up in the Outlook, and the mail from address is, clearly not real. What would happen in a situation like this, if you were to hit your get started button, in the email, you would you get a login prompt that would look like the O365 login. You put in your credentials, and what would end up happening is you probably get some type of error page after that, and you may not think anything of it. But now somebody has your Office 365 email login, and they could start doing things, which I'll talk about in another slide or two here. So how to spot a phishing attempt and what to do. One of the biggest things is don't trust links or buttons provided in the email. So if you get an email, it says it's from your bank, say it's Bank of America, and it says, "Hey, there's a problem with your account." In that case, if you want to go check and make sure that your account's okay, go to the Bank of America website, but don't go to it through that link, because if that link is a phishing link, you've now given up your credentials. So go to that website through whatever favorite or shortcut or Google it or app that you have. Never give out information such as a username or password. So, if you click on an email message and it asks you to log in, like if you click on a link or attachment, that is really the moment where you need to stop and take a moment of pause. That should be a little bit of a red flag, even if you know the person that the email came from. And I'll speak to that on the next slide. Um, that should be a trigger point, a break point for you. Look at the from address carefully. So, we showed in that previous email, the zero instead of an O. I've seen fake domains registered with a .net instead of a .com. I saw one domain name where the last name, the domain name had two L's side by side. The attackers actually registered a fake domain name that had three L's in it. I can tell you, if you're looking at an email address, even on a full screen like this, it's tough to tell the difference between two L's and three L's when they're all side by side. On a small screen such as a mobile device, it's next to impossible. So you have to develop almost a little bit of a sixth sense. Obviously some other things. If it's unsolicited, it's got poor spelling or grammar, or it just seems odd. When in doubt, delete it. That is one of the single biggest things that you can do for an email message. So if you get, if it's legitimate, the person's going to reach back out to you, especially if you get something like an invoice, and it's a fake invoice. If that was a real invoice, you'll hear from the person again. Trust me on that. So if you do fall victim to a phishing attack and you give up your, credentials, what happens? Well, in that scenario, depending on how you're configured, you now have somebody else that's, basically sitting over your shoulder, looking at your email, but you don't actually know that they're sitting over your shoulder. So we worked an attack last year, a compromise, all right, year and a half, almost 2 years ago now, where the accounting person and a manufacturer, her, she fell victim to an email phish, and somebody gained access to her mailbox. So what the attacker did was is they went in and they perused this person's inbox. Again, they're doing it from a web browser. Um, the user Jane, I'll call her Jane in this case. Jane's kind of going on with her normal day, has no idea anything like this is going on. So what the attacker does is they go and actually look at Jane's sent items to see, hey, who's Jane corresponding with, and what does she say to them? I missed one part of this, which is Jane's in an accounting role in this organization, and Jane had recently sent out invoices to 4 of their clients. So what the attacker did is while they're in the mailbox as Jane, they did a reply all to each one of those messages and said, "Oh, oh, by the way, we recently just changed our banking information. So please now remit your payments to such and such bank," and kind of went on their merry way. Now, if you're one of these secondary or what I would call downstream victims, you might not think anything of this. This is Jane, this is email legitimately coming from Jane's mailbox on Jane's system. You have no clue that that's actually not Jane sending it. It's Bob the hacker. Um, One of the things that these attackers will do is they will create they will create Outlook rules to kind of hide their tracks. So in that case, when the attacker sent the emails, they also created a rule so that if any one of those 4 people replied to Jane, the emails got hidden. Because think of what would happen if Jane all of a sudden got a reply to an email that she didn't send. That would be that would be puzzling in the least. This story actually had an okay ending. One of the victims did actually pay the attacker $80,000, but that secondary victim was actually able to get that money stopped by their bank. But I can tell you, we see attacks like this all of the time, and we just worked an event with a compromised mailbox 2 months ago, right before the holidays, where the victim organization lost $500,000 because somebody gained access to a mailbox and sent out emails pretending to be somebody else. So again, this is real stuff. This is stuff. These things don't have. These things don't make the news, but these things are happening every single day. And when I look at it, when I look at kind of our threat matrix of what do the team and I see, while ransomware events are the things that get the headlines because they're so impactful from a business standpoint, we see by far way more phishing, compromised mailboxes. You do end up in a situation with some of these compromised mailbox where it could trigger a compliance event, which could trigger a reporting requirements depending on the type of business and the state that you're in. There was just a fine that was levied against IMED in New York under the Shield Act, where they had somebody that fell for a phishing email. They gained access to that person's mailbox, and this person kept 7 years worth of emails, in their direct mailbox. And as a result, you know, this attacker had access to all of these things. So, some very real things, and it's one of the reasons why we continue to preach good mailbox hygiene. We worked a case where we had an organization up in New York that almost had to have a reportable event because the user's mailbox that got compromised had 5-year-old emails that had Excel attachments with names, date of birth, social security numbers, and driver license. Fortunately, in that one, we were able to conclusively prove with log files that those things didn't get access, but it would have become a much more significant event. The other thing to talk about real quick is ransomware. Ransomware is the thing that makes the news. Ransomware, for every time you hear about it on the news, there's hundreds of times that it's happening that you're not hearing about it. The short version of what ransomware does is somebody gets into your system and they basically lock your files down so you don't have access to them. Now, when ransomware first started becoming mainstream about 10 years ago, everybody got smarter and we all started putting better backup systems in place. Well, the attackers, because this was such a lucrative business, changed their business model. So now, unlike the past where ransomware was the first thing that would happen, ransomware is now typically the last thing that we see happen in an attack. And very, very commonly, what we will see if somebody gets ransomware is prior to that ransomware, the attackers have taken copies of the data and they threaten to release it unless you pay the ransom. So think about that for a second. I don't know what any of you do for a business, for your different business models here, but if you're an accounting firm or a law firm or God forbid a medical practice, and somebody threatens to release all of your data, unless you pay up a ransom, you're going to be pretty likely to pay that ransom at that point. Because the business impact, whether it's reputational from a litigation standpoint, regulatory, it's just through the roof. And our team doesn't directly do ransomware payments for organizations, but we work side by side with some companies that do. And I worked one case where the organization wasn't sure. We couldn't definitively determine if the data had been exfiltrated, but this organization was so concerned about the reputational hit that they actually still paid the ransom anyway. And that was about a $30,000 ransom, which it's going to sound weird. That's actually a small ransom in this. We're typically seeing ransoms in the multi-100,000 and $1 million plus range. So unfortunately, a lot of bad things that can happen out there. The good news is that there are things that you can do. And again, this is a numbers game. Where I live, I'm actually in northern Connecticut. My town is very, very famous for bears. We have a lot of bears. I get bears that knock over my garbage can. And there's a joke that when you're hiking, you don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to be faster than your friends. And security is the absolute the same way. So a couple big things that you can do. Um, yeah, it's 2022 and we are still talking about passwords. I am shocked at the amount of people that still don't have good passwords or don't take passwords seriously. But passwords are one of the biggest things that you can do. So we've got a lot of different, things here, but there's really kind of three things that I want to hit on in particular. Um, One is the longer the password, the better. So you should never do a password that's less than 8 characters. Ideally, 12 to 18 characters is probably the sweet spot. When you're trying to figure out what a 12 to 18 character password should be, is this is where, the concept of what's called a passphrase can be really, really handy. So trying to come up with, rather than coming up with winter 2022 exclamation question mark dash three, in some set of verbiage, use a quote, use a song lyric, use the title of a movie, use something that's significant to you and is long, but is easy to remember. So back in the early 2000s, I was doing some work out in California for a manufacturer, and the administrative password for their network was "I see dead people." So obviously, it was right after the movie The Sixth Sense came out. Nice long password. They replaced a bunch of letters with numbers. They had a couple special characters, and it really was a really good password. It's one of the best ones I ever worked with because it was long, it was complex, it was memorable. What you don't want to do is you don't want to tell your people to have to do 32 character passwords that they have to change every week, because what's going to happen in that case is that they're all just going to start writing them down on a sticky note or saving them on a file on their machine. It's just, there has to be a level of pragmatism that comes with these passwords. Now, the reality is that while people try to crack or brute force passwords, that's not the preferred method anymore for attackers getting the passwords. The easiest way for them to get passwords is to try and trick people for them. So we talk about the phishing. That is so incredibly successful. Um, actually, sorry, one thing I missed in that. We talk about those phishing emails when somebody actually, compromises a mailbox. In the past, we would say that if the email message came from somebody you knew, you could inherently trust it. That is no longer the case. Just let that sit for a second. You Just because you get an email and you've worked with this person in the past, you don't know if it's Jane doing the email or it's Bob the attacker. So if you're ever wondering on an email if something doesn't seem quite right, reach out to that person, but don't reach out through email, because if it is a compromised mailbox with an attacker, they may have rules in place and Jane never sees it. So sorry, I missed that point before, but that was significant. So, again, we need to be careful that we're not giving up our passwords in places. But the other big thing is don't reuse passwords. A couple years ago, LinkedIn had a pretty serious data breach, and their entire email address, not entire, a good chunk of their email address and passwords were compromised. Now, in reality, somebody can't do a lot of damage to you, from a life standpoint. Something happens with your LinkedIn account, you can just blow it away and start a new one. But what the attackers are hoping is that you're one of the north of 60% of the people that use that same email address and password on other systems or all of the systems that you use. So what can happen in a situation like that is contrary to popular belief, people that are trying to crack passwords and do things nefarious, it's not the hacker with the gray hoodie leaned over the computer in a dark room. These are scripts that they're running, and these scripts run continuously. So what'll happen is say LinkedIn gets compromised. These attackers get a list of email addresses and passwords that go with it. They're going to try those lists against other systems in what's called a credential stuffing attack. And that's where, they just keep trying these combinations, and then they flag the ones that work. Now, you may not be worried about your LinkedIn account getting breached, but I'm pretty sure if your bank does, or your Amazon account, or your PayPal, or your healthcare system, your records, that's going to be significant to you. So wherever possible, you need to be using different passwords. There's some schools of thought on how often you have to change a password that are changing, mainly because of multi-factor authentication, which we'll talk about here on the next slide. Um, Changing your passwords a couple times a year isn't necessarily a bad thing. Part of the reason why the from an industry standpoint we're changing is what we found is that by having people change, say, on their network passwords every 60 days or so, um, we're actually making things less secure because people were much more likely to reuse or use weak passwords. So it became counterproductive. So, we don't push as hard. Unfortunately, a lot of the compliance standards actually still require some type of regular password change, um, but you don't have to get crazy with it. If you ever think one of your accounts has been compromised, by all means, that's a great thing to do, is to change your passwords. But the big thing is I just told you a couple things that are contradictory, which is use long passwords, don't use the same ones, change them on a regular basis. And you might be saying, okay, Tim, how am I going to keep that all straight? This is where tools such as password managers can come in really handy. So for those of you who don't know what a password manager is, a password manager it's either a software application or a cloud-based system that serves as a password vault. So what you do with that is rather than having to remember or keep track of them in a Word file or an Excel file, which is very scary, you use this password vault. And what that password vault allows you to do is just keep using different passwords, really strong passwords, because it takes the work of having to remember those, off of you. Now, the challenge, what I'll always get challenged on, which is okay, that's great, Tim, but doesn't that now mean I've got a vulnerability associated with the password vault? And the answer is potentially. But this is what these people do. So they're going to have a level of security that's higher than you. That being said, you need to take some good steps in that. If you do a password vault system, and there's a couple real popular ones out there, LastPass, Dashlane, and Keeper are the three that I always hear the most of. If you do say LastPass, and I personally use LastPass, I'm a huge fan of it, and you only do a 4-character password on it, all right, well, something bad's going to happen to you at that point, because that's just, you've now put all your eggs in one basket and you're not watching that basket. I can tell you that for me, if you were trying to get into my LastPass, good luck, because it's a 20-character password. And I also have multi-factor authentication in place, and I get alerted when it gets used. So there's things that you can do to really kind of to keep those things secure. We're actually starting to see some of the compliance requirements. Haven't seen it hit the cyber insurance yet, but I think that'll be coming. We'll start to require it. So, multi-factor authentication. I am a huge, huge proponent of multi-factor authentication. So, most of you, maybe you don't know the term, but if you've ever logged into a system and it's like, okay, we're going to text you a code, that's multi-factor authentication. So it's a concept of something which is a username and password, something you have, perhaps a phone that's either registered with the cell number or an app on it, or maybe even a token, back in the old RSA days, or something that you are, where you can either use something like a fingerprint scan, or retina scan, or a face scan. And to be able to access things, you have to have two of those things, or in some cases, all three. Now, where that becomes significant is that I talked before about when I got compromised, and I fell victim to a phishing attack. I had multi-factor authentication in place on that email, and what that did is that prevented somebody, even if somebody instantly saw what my password was, because I fell for it, they wouldn't have been able to get in, because if they tried to log in, it would have buzzed my phone. So again, it's that concept of a belt and suspenders. Two things that are going to help to protect you. Now, one of the things that we have to be careful with is that this is an example of an application called Duo. I don't know if any of you use Duo. Duo is a leading MFA app that's out there, now owned by Cisco. Absolutely fantastic application. We use it very heavily in our market. It's absolutely the leader. Is we're seeing people have gotten a little bit complacent with it because they've gotten so used to it. So when you do a request, to log in, it's going to trigger, one of these Duo login requests. And you see in that first pane on the left there, under where it says Mike, it says 127.0.1, 0.0.1 unknown. So what that's going to do is that's going to show you the IP address and the approximate geographical location of where this request is coming from. Now, that can help you give you some insight as to whether this is a legitimate request or not. Obviously, if you're in the middle of logging in, or if you just change a password and you get a request like that, by all means, in all likelihood, that's legitimate. I say approximate geographic location because depending on what type of internet connection you're on, it may show as different areas depending on the routing. So even though I'm in northern Connecticut, I'm on Cox Cable for my internet, and it actually shows as my address is Providence. My address in the office in Connecticut shows as Texas, just because that's how it routes. So there's a little bit of pragmatism that needs to happen with that. But if you end up in a situation where it says your login request is coming from Dubai or Germany, okay, that's something that should get your attention, because the routing's not going to work like that. And I bring this up because, we have a high level of adoption in our organization with clients using it, mainly because we made it mandatory. We believed in it that strongly. Is I did have an HR person of all people, fall victim to they had their email get compromised. They fell for, we believe, a phishing email, and then excuse me, and then in the middle of the day one day they got a duo prompt, and the user wasn't thinking anything of it. They didn't really look at it. They hit the green button, proved it. Well, what they didn't realize was is that was the attacker. And they they not only unlocked the door by giving their password, but then they opened it wide open, for for themselves to get compromised. So we just need to be mindful. And I think one of the biggest lessons from a security standpoint is always check and double check. And we just have to be cautious with that. So a couple last slides here. Um, Outside of the human element, one of the biggest things that you can do to keep your system safe is to keep them updated. Every single day, new vulnerabilities are coming out, whether it's for the Windows platform, the Mac OS platform, iOS, Google Android, all of these things. And sometimes they get, these vulnerabilities will get targeted very, very quickly. If any of you unfortunately got hit with the Microsoft Exchange compromise of last year, um, in that case, the attacks actually came out before anybody knew about the vulnerability. So we were all kind of sitting ducks, anybody that had that. But in most cases, when we see a major attack, the vulnerability was actually something that was from months, if not years ago. So as soon as you can, apply the relevant patches, you always want to do that. When, there's no reason at this point to not just do automatic updates. If you've been in IT as long as I have, there used to be a little bit of a grain of salt that you would do the updates, but you'd never really want to be first with them. There are occasions where updates do still break things from time to time, but that's the rarity now. So I use a Mac machine, and don't let anybody convince you that Macs don't have vulnerabilities. They absolutely have vulnerabilities. They don't just get targeted. They don't get targeted as heavily because there's just a fraction of them compared to Windows devices. I leave my Mac on, and when it needs to do an update, I just let it do it. Same thing with the Windows machines I have home. I've got it set up on the automatic update with Microsoft. It processes them. It does a reboot in the middle of the night when I'm not using it. It works like a charm. Same thing with the updates on my Apple mobile devices. You know, anywhere you can, you want to use technology and automation to make your life easier, because there are so many security threats, there's so many bad things that can happen that it can be very, very difficult to stay on top of it. One of the last things to hit on this slide is, don't use unsupported end of life software. The short version, don't use old stuff. If you're still using Windows 7 at home or at your business, you need to move off of it. If you still have a Windows 2008 or Windows 2003 server, you need to move off of it. And the reason for that is that Microsoft actually goes 10 years with doing updates for the different operating systems, but after 10 years they stop unless you pay some astronomical fee. So what that means is if new vulnerabilities are found, you're out of luck with getting an update. And if you're in a business that falls under some type of compliance requirement, you're actually now out of compliance because you're not using reasonably updated software. So it's just one thing to keep in mind. One of the slides that we added as part of the pandemic is just how to stay safe when you're either teleworking, so you're working from home, or as everybody starts traveling again. So ideally, any remote work you're doing, you're using a company-owned device. That was a big shift for a lot of organizations in the early stages of the pandemic. And one of the things that made me absolutely twitch as a security person is I don't want I don't want home machines on my network, because I have no insight as to what's going on in them. I have no insight as to how well they're updated or how well they're protected or how many different people use them. I've certainly seen over the years, it's much less of an issue now where a salesperson takes their laptop home and then their kids load in some type of math application or something on it, or worse yet, a game with mods. Um, work machines should be for work machines. Store the files in approved locations. So, I know there's a tendency, especially depending on what type of connectivity you have at home, keeping the stuff locally as you're working on it. And in some cases you may have to if you're dealing with big files. Um, if you do that, they may not be fully protected and they might not be backed up. And if you have, not even a security event. If you just have some type of hardware failure, you could be in a tough spot. If you need to share files, either with coworkers or with outside partners, um, use approved tools. There's nothing that makes us crazier than we're helping an organization check on either after an event or if they have to let somebody go, and we find that they shared a couple files with somebody on Google Drive. They had their own personal Box account, share file. I mean, every crazy piece of software, because not only does the organization potentially lose control of it, which again could create compliance issues, but you don't know how reputable some of these are. So, what's the concern if somebody, puts a financial file or a file with information about your clients in some type of, free sharing service that you now have no insight on. Um, Use a VPN. So, in particular, when you're traveling, if you're connecting to a free or a public Wi-Fi, don't do anything sensitive without using VPN connection. And the reason for that is when you're on a free or public Wi-Fi, you don't know who else is on there. You don't know what they're doing. You don't necessarily know if it's a real. What happens if you use a VPN is that creates this tunnel, an encapsulated tunnel, so that all of your data is encrypted, all your traffic's encrypted, and somebody can't see it. So it's a real good level of protection. What I will do when I travel is I will actually use my phone as a hotspot. We're now at a point where the internet service, over cell phones is so good that in some cases it's actually faster than the wireless where I go. So I'll set up the tethering. I'll set my phone up as a mobile hotspot, and I can just work. And that's a closed loop. Nobody else is connecting to it, so it goes from my laptop to my phone to out the cellular network, which is secure. Um, don't leave your devices unattended. I am still shocked as I travel again of the amount of times I hear somebody, hear the announcement at an airport of so and so come back to the gate because you left your laptop, backpack, phone, whatnot. Um, don't leave your devices unlocked either. If you walk away from your machine, lock it. Don't turn the features off on your phone or your mobile device that help keep you safe. If you turn off the facial recognition or the key code on your Apple, on your iPhone or your Android phone, and you inadvertently leave your phone somewhere, now somebody has the full ability to pick up your phone and start going through all of your stuff. And if you're like me, you have just as much sensitive information on your phone as you do on your material on your laptop. Don't, I mentioned it before, don't let others use your work device. Um, I don't know how many people print work, at this point anymore. I think that's less of an issue. And if you're not going to use the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth, turn them off. From a home standpoint, even before the pandemic hit, we would talk about home network security because of the fact that there's just one internet. There's not a separate internet for work and a separate internet for home. So depending on how well we all have our devices at home configured, it impacts the overall health, of the internet. So a couple things is, your wireless network is the gateway to your home network. Unless you have some type of wired network at home, which I don't really see that anymore. So things that you can do are change, what's called your SSID, which is a service set identifier, um, to hide it so that somebody has to know what the name is. And if your neighbors aren't close, and people can't connect to your Wi-Fi, even if they know it, that's okay. But if you're like in a townhouse or a condo complex or an apartment building, you may have the ability to see all sorts of other people's Wi-Fi networks. By hiding it, and disabling the SSID from broadcasting, that gives you another level of control. Other things that you can do is putting the encryption, to the highest level. And if people do need to connect to it, depending on the type of wireless system you have, you can actually create a guest network. One of the best things I did was a couple years ago, switch to what's called a mesh network system, use a Eero, and that allows me to set up a guest network. So if my kids have friends that come over and they want to do some gaming or something like that, I don't have to let those people that are only going to be temporary connect to my regular system. I can set up a spot where they can connect in, and then I can just easily revoke it. But when we look at whether it's your wireless network or any of the devices on your network, you need to keep these things up to date. And one of the big things to keep in mind is we're now at a point where we have so many devices that connect to the network that you don't necessarily even realize it. So, my oldest daughter moved out a couple months ago when she got a full-time job after graduating. But when she was home, myself, my wife, and our three kids, we had somewhere between 35 to 40 devices on the network. Now, You might say, well, it's because you work in technology, Tim, and you're a geek, so you got a lot of stuff, and that's partially true. But the reality is almost everybody else had the same amount of stuff. You know, when you think about having a computer, everybody's got a computer, if not two. Everybody's got a phone. You have tablets, you have e-readers, you have shared things. So you have video game systems, you have things like Apple TV, Chromecast, Roku's, you have Roombas, you have Alexas, Google Homes, Nest thermostats and cameras. You have wireless internet connected litter boxes and cat feeders. You have appliances now. There's so many things in our home that connect to the internet now that each one of those creates a potential separate threat. So one of the biggest things I tell people to do is, if you just bought a new washer and dryer and it connects to the internet to be able to send you alerts when your laundry's done, if you're not going to use the feature, don't enable it. Just it's as simple as that. Just because it's there doesn't mean you have to use it. As more and more appliances and devices get connected, we really need to be mindful of what these things are doing. Changing the passwords on them so that the default passwords aren't in place, and then keeping them updated because each and every one of those things can potentially create a risk. So with that, I wanted to share one last slide here. My organization, ADNET Technologies, our domain name is thinkadnet.com. If you go to our website, we have a lot of content out there under the What We're Thinking section. You can follow us on social media. Please feel free to connect with me if you'd like. If you couldn't tell, I love talking about security. It's something that I'm very passionate about. As I mentioned, I've worked a lot of scenarios, and I feel really, really bad for people that go through it. It creates a visceral reaction for me because it's just so incredibly impactful. So anything we can do to help people, avoid an event is something we want to do. So with that, let me stop sharing here. I don't know, Jen or Kenny, if we have any questions out there.
So, Tim, I have a couple things I'll bring up, and people can put in some questions in there, and then I have a question for you at the end as well, too. So, thank you so much, Tim. This is awesome, and obviously great information that all of everybody out there needs to know. For those of you that are our clients, you know that we do the security scorecards for you on a regular basis, and just reinforcing that that's really important. And the reason that we give you those scorecards is that so you can start doing the blocking and tackling on a lot of the stuff that Tim brought up. And as Tim has mentioned, and as we've told you before, a lot of those security things are free. They're not chargeable things that you need to do. We're not really trying to upsell you on anything. We just really want you to be secure. And again, a lot of those basic blocking and tackling are free. The other thing I'll reinforce, and Tim brought this up, and you guys know that you guys that listen to me on a regular basis, two-factor authentication. There is nothing more important that you can do to secure every part of everything you do than two-factor authentication. Do it everywhere you can, do it every way that you can, on everything that you can. As Tim has said, all it takes is for somebody to break into your Facebook account, and all of a sudden they have your password that you usually use, but then they also have all of your information from Facebook. They know what town you grew up in. They know your mother's maiden name. They know your dog's name, your pet's name. And I know you use your pet's name as your password. I guarantee it. So they have part of your password right there. We're in the process of rolling out to all of our clients. We're putting on 2FA on all of your admin accounts because we use those more often than you do. We're putting those on those. We're using Duo for that as well. As Tim mentioned, it's a great two-factor authentication. We're doing that on all of our clients' admin accounts, just across the board. The other thing I want to keep in mind too is that on the ransomware part, offsite backups is really key, that you get a copy of your data offsite and out of your organization. We secure your on-site backup as much as we possibly can, but the next level of security is getting that data off-site, because it's so much. Tim, you can definitely disagree with me, and I won't take it wrong. It's so much data it's so much more difficult for them to traverse into the off-site backup than it is on the on-site backup as well. Workstation patching, Tim, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, please have your users enable it, but what we're doing on our clients as well is that we're still finding that, as Tim mentioned, people are deferring those patches. You're going to see from us, we're actually going to start on your behalf forcing those patches to go through on your users' workstations for those that are deferring it, because it's so important that those patches go through. Many of you have already gotten email notifications on us that you're going to do that. Last thing I'll bring up before I have my question for Tim, same thing, user training. Make sure they watch this webinar. Make sure they watch the other webinars on our site. Remember, we have a video just on phishing, touches on a lot of the things that Tim had, just on training on how to detect a phishing, because that is like one of the main ways that people are getting in, and it's all social engineering as well. Now, Tim, the question I have for you, do you see the activities in Ukraine having any impact on cybersecurity over here in the US?
So fortunately, we have not seen it yet. There was an attack against a certain brand of firewalls about a week or so ago. WatchGuards that had some issues, but fortunately, we haven't seen anything that's been widespread. It's I can tell you when you're in the security space. I'm a news junkie to begin with, but this makes me even that much more sensitive to it. So um, it still could happen, because there's the Russians have a lot of capabilities in this area, but anything that we've seen so far has been very much restricted to just that area of the world. A lot of systems from Ukraine. I think what's happening is that there's a pretty solid dogfight that's going on in the cyber world that none of the rest of us see, because we did see last weekend British Airways had their systems all knocked offline. Nobody came right out and said it, but there was a lot of thought that that was retaliatory event for some of the strong measures that the UK took. Um, Obviously, the Ukrainian systems have been hit very hard, but so have Russian systems. RT.com was off for a while, as was some of the Kremlin and the Ministry of Defense things. So, knock on wood, okay right now, and hopefully it stays that way. But if this, stays and continues to be protracted, we don't know. And part of what we have to do is we have to be able to pivot. So while there aren't any specific threats, the guidance that we've been giving organizations is cover the basics. Make sure users are mindful of what's happening, have MFA in place anywhere and everywhere you can. Do your updates. All of these things are, and tell your users to be watchful. Especially if you're in an industry that could potentially get targeted. You do the basics, and you're hopefully less likely to have some type of an event. So
And I think, like, to your point, and you said something similar to this, is that if you're in a neighborhood and there's a bunch of doors that are unlocked, you want to be the one that has your door locked, because you want to be the least likely target that people go after. You just want to
100%.
make it much more difficult. Awesome. Tim, thank you so much for your time. Jen, is there any other house cleaning that we need to do?
No, we're all set.
Awesome. All right. Awesome.
Have a great
Thank you
day,
so much,
everybody.
Tim. I'm sure you and I are going to talk. We talk on a regular basis. So thank you so much for taking your time out of your day. I appreciate it. In case you guys didn't know, Tim and I work very closely together. So it's great to see him in video.
If any of you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me online. I love talking about this stuff. Love helping people. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.